Hey friends, it's almost time, it's almost here. Aquarius season, baby. I am going to give you a list of 10 books that give off big Aquarius energy. Before we get into everything, I feel like there are a bunch of lovely new humans in this space and I'm so excited to connect with all of y'all. I know there is a little bit of a culture of being a silent viewer on booktube, and I know that because I was a silent viewer on booktube for a very long time, but I would love to hear from you. So if you are new to this space and you feel so inclined, say hey. I'd love to chat with you guys and connect with you guys. So we are doing this video for birthday season. I saw Renee from So I Read This Book and Sophie from Bibliosophie do this, and I deeply love this idea. So in case you don't know about the coolest side of the zodiac, I'm not biased here, just a casual resident Aquarius. Aquarius season is from January 20th to February 18th. We have incredible Aquarius representation. We have poet Derek Walcott, we have Rachel Cusk, Gloria Naylor, Edith Wharton, Virginia Woolf, Lewis Carroll, Langston Hughes, Judy Blume, Olga Tokarczuk, Audre Lorde, and then my favorite dynamic duo, Toni Morrison and Angela Davis. It's quite a stacked zodiac club, and Aquariuses are described to be eccentric, to be unique. They are quite phobic to having their freedoms circumscribed in any way. As soon as we feel someone pressing down on our freedoms, we're out. They are described as deep thinkers, as intellectuals. I won't ascribe to all that. I can be very airheaded, but that's what the Google said so. They will fight for idealistic causes. They have a deep need to be alone, are usually described as visionaries, and sometimes have trouble finding where they belong. Checks out. They are super into interesting conversations, also super into not being emotionally vulnerable. They can be unreliable, they can be inflexible, and at this point, like, just tell us which Aquarius hurt you. They live in the mind, are described as independent, mysterious, and free-spirited, but are also described as detached and cold and aloof. So that's sort of like the nebulous cloud of Aquarius traits. So I think I'm gonna condense these into 5 main personality traits. That way I can just sort of organize the books into those. So I'm gonna say open-minded / progressive, eccentric, emotionally distant and allergic to vulnerability, interested in interesting conversations, and pursuit of the intellect, or just like very intellectually curious. I am a very cuspy Aquarius. My birthday falls just into when it starts. I will say I am an Aquarius sun with a Cancer ascendant, and so this is chaos, baby. Pure chaos. Okay, I think that's been enough Aquarius propaganda. Let's get into the book recommendations. So the first book that I have that feels hella Aquarius to me is Motherhood by Sheila Heti. I feel like most of Heti's books are weirdos. They're super eccentric and they're always trying to subvert convention. I mean, Homegirl could have just written a book on the ambivalence of motherhood, but she said, no, let's find a coin, let's ask questions, let's let it lead the narrative. This is a book that is looking at sort of the compromises and compensations in choosing to be a mother. She is looking at how we approach the question of whether to become a mother. She starts with thwarting the assumption that women default want to be mothers and sort of contemplates herself away from that, because I think a lot of the times the conversation is, what if you get to like 40 and you haven't had a kid and you regret it? But she's sort of like, well, what if I have a kid and there's instant regret? What do I do then? And so yeah, it's like a wonderful cascade into this thought process. She also takes this idea of the notion of love that is very specific to motherhood, and then she sort of like cracks that and applies it to various different buckets of a person's life. So how like an all-consuming love can be felt for a partner, can be felt for your art. There's this really interesting conversation here about how if you are to make a child the epicenter of your life, if you can also split that nucleus and have art be the epicenter of your life as well. Is it possible? But also, if you are a woman, can you sort of be an artist if you've not experienced the experience of motherhood? So yeah, there are a lot of really fascinating, interesting questions, and the way that she is sort of burrowing into all of them is always in a crooked, weird, very eccentric way. The next book that I have that is deeply Aquarius is Sula by Toni Morrison. And this one's special. It's a double whammy because our writer is also Aquarius. This teeny novel is about 2 friends, Nell and Sula, and their taut friendship over the years. Sula is a woman who is exclusively driven by her whims. She is wayward, she is eccentric. She lives a life where she is constantly pushing against conformity. There's a quote in here between Sula and her grandma's like, when are you gonna have a kid? And Sula's like, I'm not trying to make someone else, I'm trying to make myself. I'm not saying that Aquarius are anti-motherhood in any way. Yeah, Sula is just, she's a woman who's dedicated to safeguarding her freedoms despite how that might impact those around her. I will say that Toni Morrison did call Sula a deplorable character. She was saying that Sula is deplorable because true freedom is choosing your responsibilities. Sula sort of forfeits all of that. There is one scene here where something happens, people feel betrayed by Sula, rightly so, and she's like, I don't get why you're upset. If you pluck emotion out of this, you shouldn't be upset. And listen, I am self-aware, and that feels super Aquarius to me. Okay, our next deeply Aquarius book is Bluets by Maggie Nelson. Remember when I said Aquariuses are allergic to emotional vulnerability? Homegirl literally said, I am going to metabolize my breakup through thinkers and writers, and above all, the color blue. And if that's not the most avoidant thing you've ever heard, I don't know what to tell you. But Bluets is this beautiful lyrical essay that is looking at the suffering and loss that comes sort of at the perimeters of love. She's looking at all of this through the prism of blue, and it's very meditative. It feels like a meditation. I've not read anything like this before, and it's one that I keep wanting to return to. Yeah, this is another super Aquarius little read for the season. Okay, the next book I have is a nonfiction, but hear me out. So, The Right to Sex by srinivasan. This is a book that's not interested in information dumping on you. It's more interested in sort of taking each corner of your thought process and stretching it. I feel like a lot of the information that Amia presents in this book are pretty well established notions within like feminist thought and theory, but what she's interested in is taking those notions that we sometimes sort of just accept as truth and sort of bending them and interrogating them. Like, this book is so interested in discourse and dialogue. Like, I remember Buddy read this with a friend. It was really fun because it was like we were discussing the discourse within the discourse. We were discussing our own discourse with the text and then sort of engaging in dialogue about the discourse with each other. It was also a reading experience that, I don't know, made me take a red pen to all of my thoughts, which I really, really enjoyed. And Amia is also a philosophy professor, so you can totally tell that she's really interested in how we think, why we have certain ideas, as opposed to just like giving us information. If we're talking about having interesting conversations and intellectual stimulation, this is our girl. The next book that I have that is deeply Aquarius is Lucy by Jamaica Kincaid. It's funny because Renee had picked another Jamaica Kincaid book, had sort of declared it Aries coded. Not this one, she picked A Small Place, but Sophie picked Lucy as the Gemini coded book. And I think that's just, we're all trying to scout Kincaid onto our zodiac team. I think Sophie might have a leg up because I think Kincaid is actually a Gemini. But here's my argument for why Lucy is an Aquarius book. Lucy is a story about this young girl. She moves from the West Indies to somewhere in the States, and she is an au pair for this wealthy family. And Lucy kind of just sits back and is critiquing everything and interrogating everything. She's super critical of the family's culture, of the culture at large, colonialism, of how the fibers of that nuclear family work, the facades they're sort of engaging with. She's also interrogating her own sexuality. She's interrogating the messy tangle of her relationship with her mother. So Lucy lives up here. She's super cerebral. She's snarky, independent, and quite frankly, a weirdo. So I would say she has big Aquarius energy. Here is my raised poker chip as to why Lucy is an Aquarius. Is that how poker works? I don't even know. If an Aquarius is defined by their pursuit of the intellectual, and homegirl literally estranged herself from her family and fled her country because her family refused to see her as someone with potential towards intellectual pursuits and instead wanted to relegate her to domesticity, I don't know what is. The next book that I have that is super Aquarius is Stillborn by Guadalupe Nettel. I actually had to look up when her birthday was because I was like, is she an Aquarius? But she's not. She is a Gemini. So this is a story about two friends, Laura and Alina. I feel like I've said this sentence so many times. But this is a story about two friends, Laura and Alina. They initially bond over the fact that they are disinterested in motherhood, and as time passes, this changes. Laura is very bookish and very adamant in her decisions. She takes a pretty permanent step to assert this sort of decision against motherhood, but Alina is someone who is more sort of malleable in her positionality and eventually is curious and is driven toward motherhood. In her sort of pursuit of motherhood, though, she encounters a lot of difficulty. It's also looking at different iterations of motherhood. So Laura's neighbor is a single mom with a very difficult child. We sort of see Laura's mother and how Laura's mother sort of has the second renaissance in her life after the stage of motherhood passes. The characters are all very thinky. Something that I like about this book is that the characters are not not solely interested in the lived experience, but in the discourse around the events of their lives, which I think is super Aquarius. The next one that I have, All This Could Be Different by Sarah Thankam Matthews. If we're thinking visionary, if we're thinking eccentric, if we're thinking a little unreliable, a tad aloof, this is our girl. And so very Aquarian. Aquarian? I'm gonna go with it. We are following S. S just got a corporate job in the Midwest at the heels of the recession. She is trying to navigate relationships, her own queerness. S is sort of awful. She is flailing at attempting to understand her sexuality. She is having a hard time figuring out how to prioritize her friendships. She is struggling with how to define and sort of embody her own definition of what it means to be a daughter, particularly an immigrant daughter. But the cool thing about this book, I think, is that we get to sit alongside her as she embarks on growth. I kind of feel like if some of the stuff that Sneha did in real life happened, she might be like castigated and chastised, maybe not given the opportunity to learn, but at the core of it, she was really interested in nurturing those connections with those around her. Sneha was not great at being in partnership and community with others, but sometimes the way that you get great at those things is by making mistakes. And so I really like that we got to watch her move through like trial and error in this way. And yeah, and I think that we get to see her grow. I think what's really interesting about this book is that we don't even learn Chick's name until 2/3 of the way through. So I think she was lacking this sort of intimacy with herself, but we sort of see that thaw. And then as she allows herself to be vulnerable with herself, we are granted access into this intimate space with the character as well. So yeah, mistrustful, emotionally avoidant, but eventually yielding Aquarian. Next one. Okay, this is a book that I do not have, but it is called Mona by Paula oloixarac. And this is a book on over-intellectualizing our traumas. In this book, we have a writer. This writer goes to this writer's conference, and there is a hinting at something that has happened, but it's repressed. It's pushed down. We're not gonna talk about it. And she's just gonna go through the motions. She's just gonna keep it pushing. And then at this writer's conference, we get this circus and spectacle of ego, which was so fun to read. All of these writers are postulating about what it means to be a writer and what literature is and what life is, and it was such a cognitive-y, realmy book, which then takes a sharp left turn. All of a sudden we see the things that she has been repressing sort of erupt in the text, and it just takes the weirdest, darkest turn. The ending of this felt super fever dreamy. I had one of the most visceral reactions to reading the ending. There was like this mix of mythology. I don't know, it was weird. She was such a weirdo. One that I deeply, deeply, deeply enjoyed. The next one that we have is Story of My Teeth by Valeria Luiselli. This is also a weirdo. We are learning about this auctioneer. His name is Highway. He has no teeth, and he collects all of these things and he ascribes stories to them. And the story is told in sort of like a jigsaw way where you're not really sure what's happening or even what to believe as it's going on. It really kind of feels like being blindfolded and then led through a gallery. It's a very strange reading experience that I thoroughly enjoyed. There's also this piece where she starts to look at all of these different Mexican writers. Like, we're looking at literature and Mexican literature in particular, and we're getting all of these sort of clips of Mexican writers, and then she sort of slips Luiselli in there. And it's like not completely breaking the fourth wall, but doing something, caressing it. Yeah, very mysterious, weird little book that I loved. I am sorry for yet again mentioning this book, and by its title alone, it maybe probably shouldn't be on this list. Sorry to all the Libras and Scorpios out there, but Autumn by Ali Smith is, I think, pretty Aquarius. Let me tell you why. This is a story about, I also feel like I've said this sentence a million times. This is a story about a friendship between this precocious little girl and this older guy, how they work to see the world and reframe the world with a sense of playfulness and whimsy and awe and compassion. We sort of see the inception of their friendship when Elizabeth is a young little girl, and we watch how time changes their relationship, how time changes how they understand the world and how they understand each other. I think this book is a very head in the clouds kind of book. Yeah, they're talking about art and they're talking about love and they're talking about time, and even though there is this like generational tiff between them, they always manage to sort of bridge it through like intellect and art and a desire to sort of engage in continued discourse. So I think this book is very Aquarius. I am sorry for A, talking about this book nonstop, and B, to all the Libras and Scorpios out there. I mean, feel free to use it, but I'm gonna break a chip off and put it in my pocket for the Aquarius team, sorry. Okay, last but not least, my maybe favorite Aquarius book is Beautiful World, Where Are You by Sally Rooney. This is a story about a friendship and the relationships that sort of stem from those friendships. So we have Alice and Eileen. They are longtime friends. Alice and Eileen are just making their way through their 30s. They're falling out of love, falling in love. They're trying to just kind of stay afloat in late stage capitalism. Above all, they're just trying to learn how to love each other in the way that's best for them. What it means to show up for each other in a way that the other person understands, is aligned with that other person's values and how they love. So yeah, this is a book that is like detached and cold and very thinky and intellectualizing the interpersonal, but also a little bit mushy. Rooney is also 2 days out from being Aquarius, so it tracks. And I know that a lot of people have a lot of qualms about the fact that there are email exchanges, and I have tried so many times to get friends to engage in email correspondence with me. They never do. But I really like how they were sort of interrogating or trying to make sense of the world around them. They were trying to make sense of like politics, philosophy, and all of that through their email correspondence. I feel like that's kind of relatable. I've had various voice note threads around various topics like this. So yeah, it's interesting the way that you cling to certain things based on when you're reading a book. So I've read this book now 3 times. I read it every autumn, and I feel like every time I read it, there's something different that I cling to. Like, I had never really picked up on the questions around motherhood in this book. But yeah, this time that sort of stood out to me, and also the ways that sometimes Alice and Eileen tried to talk to each other and love each other, but they're doing so on like different radio channels, and so they never really connect. And how just because you have this established relationship with someone, sometimes you have to work at that connection. You can't just take it for granted. Because I think before I had always really focused on the relationships that each of the characters are sort of engaged with, but this time I really sort of sat in and honed in on their friendship, and it felt like opening a door to a different world, but within the same book. And this also has one of my favorite passages about how she sort of describes herself as like an instrument through which the world passes. It's like a 2-page, I think it's part of one of the emails that she sends, but it's one of the most beautiful things. Every time I read it, it like physically takes my breath away. So yeah, over intellectualizing, but also has like a soft little mushy heart, and I love this book. Okay, I am going to do an honorable mention. So like I said in the beginning of this video, I am an Aquarius sun with a Cancer rising, which means that we are overthinky. We're interested in discourse, but can sometimes be a little bit detached and a little bit aloof. Whereas my Cancer rising is totally invested in emotionality. And I feel like this book, Post-Traumatic by Chantal V. Johnson, is the embodiment of that. Hear me out. So this is a book about a lawyer living in New York. And yeah, we start to see her friendship. We start to see her fumble and trip, sprain her ankle in her attempts at romantic relationships. Then we start to see sort of the pieces of her relationship with her family come together. She does eventually become estranged from her family, and we see the why of that. But yeah, this is a book that in the beginning feels super depersonalized and super just like in the cognitive realm to like a pathological degree. Like, you need to have some emotion. But it was just so interested in the how of things. It was constantly making jokes to distance and diminish the impacts of trauma. And then the lines sort of braid towards a sentimentality in the end. There's this like yielding to something a lot softer and a lot more earnest in this book. I love this book. There are like a list of debut writers who I am so excited have given us a debut, but I'm so just like that we have to wait for their next novel to come out, because it's just like fantastic stuff. And I am impatient. All right, my loves, that's it. Those are 10 books that you can pick up for Aquarius season if you're wanting to get into the spirit. And yeah, we will see each other soon. Bye.